If you think about, okay, the AWSs, the Microsoft, the Googles of the world, the top AI research outfits on the planet are all working towards racing towards AI developments. We have things like AutoGPT improving in capabilities that allow it to do much more cognitive labor autonomously. And really, where this ends up, at least in the way you've written and many others have started to commentate on recently, is that we are probably looking at a future in the next 24 months where AI impacts millions of knowledge work jobs sooner than anyone thinks, and possibly with greater impact than we have anticipated. So, you published on LinkedIn, like you alluded to, a post about the impact of AI on knowledge workers. And I just want to read a couple quick excerpts here to tee this up and then just have you run with your thoughts and how you're looking at the impact of AI on labor. So, you've said things like GPT-4 and other advanced generative AI tech has accelerated the ability of AI to perform knowledge work, including strategic and creative work, in ways that we're still exploring and trying to comprehend. And on top of this, we're seeing recent advancements, rapid advancements such as AutoGPT, that are giving AI the agents to complete complex tasks and actions with minimal human intervention. Now, you say that AI may not replace workers directly in the near term, but if companies can 5 or 10x the productivity of each knowledge worker, we certainly don't need as many employees as we have in marketing, sales, service, finance, HR, operations, etc., at least in for profit companies driven by rules of efficiency and profits. And we don't really have any clear path, despite some of the moves made by the EU recently, to government oversight or regulation. And there's no unified efforts by businesses or educational systems to address the impact on workforces and students. And you conclude with, we are potentially looking at millions of jobs being impacted in the next 1 to 2 years. And you go into a bit more of a thread from Jason Calacanis, who is a popular investor and host of the mega popular All In podcast, a great business podcast we both listen to, where he kind of put it in maybe a more abrasive or direct way by saying AI is going to nuke the bottom third of performers in jobs done on computers, even in creative ones, in the next 24 months. So I'll leave it there. Do you want to walk us through what you're thinking? Why this post? Why now?
As I alluded to in the open, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. So, uh, in my talks starting probably back in November, I don't remember when I first started saying it, but the AI will only place marketers, but marketers who use AI will place marketers who don't, inspired by the Stanford study from 2018 about AI not replacing radiologists. Um, we have been trying to use that premise to one, I believed it. Two, to give hope to people that this is not um, this is not going to definitely replace lots of jobs. It's kind of like there is a path forward where we can avoid a really negative outcome. In recent weeks, I have come to believe that it might not be entirely true. And so I started changing that slide in my presentations, including at the AI for Writers Summit in March, that said, AI won't replace writers, but writers who use AI will replace writers who don't, or at least they will have the best chance of thriving in the coming years. So it's almost like a caveat to say, like, listen, I don't know for a fact that if you dive all in on AI, that you aren't still at risk of losing your job. When we look at the realities of how much efficiency can be gained and productivity can be generated, that there is the chance that you're still going to be in. So I've been debating how to say this on LinkedIn and how to talk about it on the podcast without sounding overly alarmist or being perceived to be trying to create fear as a motivating factor, which is the opposite of what we try and do. I've talked about on this podcast before, though, that I think a sense of urgency is critical to this. So let me kind of set the stage. There are approximately 132 million full-time workers in the United States. I'm not going to get into a global audience today. I'll focus on kind of what we know a little better. Of those, it's estimated about 100 million are knowledge workers, what we've previously would call like white collar jobs. That's about 75% of the total US workforce are knowledge workers. A knowledge worker, according to Wikipedia, not GPT-4, are workers whose main capital is knowledge. Examples include programmers, physicians, pharmacists, architects, marketers, engineers, scientists, design thinkers, public accountants, lawyers, editors, academics, whose job is to, quote, think for a living. So just kind of what are we talking about as knowledge? So we're on the same page. If you think about the industries that where these people largely exist, professional services, including marketing agencies and many marketers, software, information technology, finance and insurance, healthcare, publishing, just some examples. Okay. So when I first had a kind of like, we need to do something about this, there was a report that appeared to be leaked from Goldman Sachs because the PDF of the report was not distributed directly by Goldman Sachs that I had seen, but a PDF of this report ended up online, and Goldman Sachs ended up writing a definitely more watered down summary of the report on their blog last week. So this report, the headlines that the media ran with, was a report by Goldman Sachs predicts that as many as 300 million jobs could be affected by generative AI. So when you go into the actual PDF of the report, it says, quote, if generative AI delivers on its promised capabilities, the labor market could face significant disruption. Some 2/3 of US jobs are exposed to automation by AI. Goldman says, adding that of those positions affected, as much as 50% of their workload could be replaced. And it went on to say, although the impact of AI on the labor market is likely to be significant, most jobs and industries are only partially exposed to automation and are thus more likely to be complemented rather than substituted. But this is where it starts to get kind of like hard to comprehend. Some 7% of US jobs could be replaced by AI. So quick math, 10% of 132 million is 13 million. So 7% is roughly around what, 10 million jobs. We find that roughly 2/3 of current jobs are exposed to some degree. Okay. So as we started like looking at this data, and I'll get into the OpenAI report in a moment and some other personal thoughts, my general feeling it is one of the most important things we can be doing with the platform we have to be creating awareness that there is a possibility, a very real possibility, that knowledge work is going to be disrupted in the near future. So as I said in the post, when I start looking at the possibilities and you just start adding up some very simple numbers, just in the SaaS industry or just in publishing, you pretty quickly get to millions of jobs being impacted and potentially lost in the next 1 to 2 years. So the LinkedIn post has, as of this moment, almost 53,000 impressions, 74 comments, 22 reposts. The vast majority of the comments are, yeah, I totally see it. Like, this is definitely important. It's really critical. We got to be talking about this. And then there was definitely some that had a bit of a more visceral reaction to what can appear to be hype. And I think in some cases, it's the Jason Calacanis quote and just Jason in general that maybe creates this reaction from people, because he's definitely a tech insider. He lives and breathes, SaaS and tech. And so within that world where coding is the dominant thing they're looking at, it's a very real thing. And so then they're extending that knowledge to other industries. And, I think you could certainly say that there could be some hyperbole within there. But once you sift through that, there are very real and imminent issues that are facing business leaders, education systems, governments, professionals, knowledge workers that we're not ready for. So when you consider the current state and what appears to be coming next, my general feeling at the moment is I would much rather organizations and leaders work under the assumption that significant job loss is imminent, that you are going to have to make choices in your organization that could affect large percentages, beyond single digit percentages of your workers. So I would rather organizations prepared for that possibility and be wrong that it doesn't happen, than do nothing and say nothing and be right. Because if you think about what we've done at the Institute since, we started talking about AI in 2014, and my second book was the first time I publicly talked about it. Started researching it in 2011, started the Institute in 2016, started the conference in 2019, our online academy in 2020. And the reality is it's been a very slow build. Like it's been hard to get people to listen, to care, and to take action. So just to quantify it, in 2022, prior to ChatGPT, we would add about, just rough average, 500 new subscribers to the Institute a month. Contacts, people who download assets, people who subscribe to the newsletter, attend a webinar for the first time, about 500 per month. Since ChatGPT, we're averaging close to 3,000. So in 2022, we added about 6,000 new contacts. We're adding 6,000 every 2 months. So what ChatGPT did was it drove massive awareness and interest in the topic. But in many cases, it's for the tools. It's for like ChatGPT, or they just want to learn about what text should I use for email, what text should I use for advertising, and that's fine as an entry point. But what we've said is the platform we've created has to do more than connect people to tools. There's plenty of people who've jumped into AI or built newsletters about the 20 tools you should go get today and all this. And we do some education around tools for sure, because that's value to people. But we need to go beyond that. So what I'm basically looking at saying, like, for 7 years, we've been telling people you have to pay attention. You have to look at what AI is going to do. It's coming. It's going to intelligently automate large portions of your work. And only a small percentage of people were listening. 500 new people a month. Now more people are listening, but they're not necessarily aware of the impact overall. So my feeling is now that people are listening, we have to do more to make them care about the really important topics. So the LinkedIn post was a starting point, and I realized like I can't tell the full story there. So I spent time this morning and last night really thinking about this. So I want to apply a little bit of my reasoning to this, and I would love for people to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We'll put this video up probably on LinkedIn, like comment there. But here's some additional thinking and context. So why do I feel that there is a reasonable probability job loss could occur in the near term? Significant job loss. I'm going to go through a few points. Number one, capitalism. Companies are driven by efficiency and profits. AI enables both of those potentially on a level we have never seen before in terms of speed of transition. We're not talking about 5-year transition to this. We're talking about 5 months of transition. 2, the economy sucks. Companies that can save money have to save money. And so if they're in a for-profit world and AI enables the ability to cut costs, they're going to do it. Third, private equity firms. Almost 12 million employees in the US. So what is that? Almost 10%, right? Almost 10%. Okay, well, roughly 7% according to the US labor force. Work for private equity backed businesses, according to the American Investment Council and Industry Lobbying Group. A 2019 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research lays out what happens when private equity firms buy companies. Researchers analyzed almost 10,000 debt-fueled buyouts between 1980 and 2013 and found that employment fell by 13% when a private equity firm took over a public company. Employment declined by even more, 16%, when private equity acquired a unit or a division of a company. Private equity firms buy businesses to maximize profits. You maximize profits initially by reducing expenses. Workforces are often the largest expense. If AI becomes a tool in the private equity tool set, it is going to be the one they wield first. There is a theory we have, going back to May of 2022, that the future of all business is AI or obsolete. I am more confident now than ever that you either build an AI native company to disrupt an existing company, or you build an AI emergent company that reduce costs and accelerate revenue through the application of AI. As you mentioned, Mike, there is no clear path to government stepping in and slowing this down, and there's no obvious unified effort by businesses or educational systems to address the impact on workforce and students. So these are all reasons that could likely occur. Another one, companies are generally unaware and unprepared for how prevalent this technology is going to be within knowledge work by the end of 2023. Just look at Microsoft 365 Copilot and Google Workspace and consider that the tech is going to be infused into every function of your business if you use those platforms, whether you go seek AI tools out or not. Next, we know from our own state of marketing AI research, which we've done 2 straight years, that the vast majority of companies do not have any AI-specific internal education or training programs. 67% of people in our survey, which we had almost 800 people last year, say lack of education and training is the top obstacle to adoption. 81% say they do not have AI-focused education and training in their organization. Next, the tech is really good and largely untapped in its potential. In language, just look at GPT-4. In image generation, look at Midjourney and Stability AI. In video, look at what Runway is doing. In coding, look at Replit, Ghostwriter, and GitHub Copilot. Then consider, as we saw with AutoGPT, the fact that people are building thousands of apps and plugins on top of these foundational models. Next, there is a paper from March 27th from OpenAI, Open Research, and the University of Pennsylvania called GPTs are GPTs, an early look at the labor market impact potential of large language models. So, what does GPT are GPTs mean? They conclude that large language models, such as GPTs, generative pre-trained transformers, exhibit traits of general purpose technologies, indicating that they could have considerable economic, social, and policy implications. If you're not familiar with general purpose technologies, they can affect an entire economy, usually at a national or global level. GPTs have the potential to drastically alter societies through their impact on pre-existing economic and social structures. Examples would be the steam engine, electricity, and information technology, as you can consider railways, interchangeable parts, electronics, things like that. Basic premise, it is a massive disruption to the way things have previously done. In the OpenAI research paper, they propose a rubric for assessing large language model capabilities and their potential on impact on jobs. They look at what they call exposure of tasks to language models. They do not distinguish between labor augmenting or labor displacing effects. They just look at exposure of tasks and roles. So they say that accounting for other generative models and complementary technologies, their human estimates, so these are people who looked at jobs and then estimated the impact of large language models. The paper itself is kind of dense and scientific, but I'm going to try and give you like the highlights here. Their human estimates indicate that up to 49% of workers could have half or more of their tasks exposed to large language models. Occupations with higher wages generally present with higher exposure. Sample occupations with the greatest exposure: interpreters and translators, survey researchers, writers and authors, PR specialists. I would throw marketers in there, accountants, web and digital designers. Two more thoughts on why I think this is going to happen. Based on my own experiences and research, as well as context of dozens of conversations, it is reasonable to assume the time to complete most knowledge tasks, such as writing, design, coding, planning, etc., can be reduced on average 20 to 30% at minimum with current generative AI technology. We are not at the peak of this technology. We are at the very beginning stages. It's actually very early in terms of understanding and adoption of the current forms, and the tech is getting faster and smarter at a compounding rate. So these percentages are only going to rise, what it's capable of doing. Okay. So those are, I'm going to get into what is going to prevent it from being true. Mike, do you have any thoughts to add on these ideas of why it might actually happen?
No, I think I would just emphasize for anyone listening, if you haven't already, go look up what Paul mentioned about Microsoft 365 and Google Workspaces. You know, we've talked to a couple of groups recently and we've emphasized again and again, these things are real. They're being baked into the technology. They're coming for every part of your tech stack. This is all going to be in your world. Even if, you know, the people using this software can't even spell AI, they are going to absolutely need to understand it and what's possible, because it will be in every part of your tech stack by the end of the year. So I think as we're talking about kind of more macro ideas here, realize that this is not just wild speculation. We're already seeing the velocity of AI adoption in all the tools that power modern businesses.
Yeah, and I mean, I've shown the Microsoft 365 Copilot trailer to a room full of CEOs. It changes things. Like it is extremely tangible to them, the impact this is going to have across their business. And so if you just look at that stuff, like it is really hard to debate this premise. Okay, so maybe a little silver lining here. What could keep this from happening? Keep us from losing millions of knowledge worker jobs. Now, keep in mind, I don't want this to happen. I am doing this. I am putting myself out there with these ideas because I am trying to get people to care so we can work together to stop this from happening. Okay. So what would prevent this? Government regulation, low probability, in my opinion. coming. There's going to be heavy regulation of this space. It is not coming in 2023. Massive legal precedent that challenges how the foundation models were trained, thus slowing down progress. This would be GPT-4 illegally scraped content, and therefore the foundation model gets shut down by the government. Or Stability AI illegally took copyrighted images to train their model, which they did, and therefore a legal case shuts down the foundation model. But that's like whack-a-mole. It's like, okay, great, we shut down GPT-4, but you can still get an open model off of Hugging Face or GitHub or wherever. Like, I could still go get models to build on top of. So it's not going to solve it. There will be cases, there will be fines paid, there may be some other disciplines, but it's not going to halt progress. Okay, other reasons that it could prevent this from being true. AI creates more new jobs in the near term than are currently being envisioned. I do believe it's going to create lots of new jobs in career paths we can't imagine. We addressed this in our book. We thought about all this, like in our book. Like, so we addressed the idea that these new roles will be created. We even hypothesized what some of them could be. They are not going to come online as fast as the jobs are going to be going away. That is just a reality. So the idea that new jobs reduce this from happening, it's a low probability, low impact. Companies rapidly adapt to reskill or upskill their talent and thereby redistribute their time in the workforces so that there isn't job loss. That is a low probability, but it is our best chance, in my opinion. So again, as I highlighted in our State of Marketing AI research, it's just not happening. There is not a wide scale effort within organizations to build internal AI academies and things like that. Now, I will say we have seen the needle move in 2023. So we're seeing our Piloting AI for Marketers series, which is like the 17 on-demand courses lumped into like 8 hours of content to get you started. We have seen large organizations buying dozens of licenses for their teams and actually using that as a training mechanism. And then like I'll show up and do moderated Q&A with their team. So like we're seeing way more effort this year than we did previously, but it's still not at scale by any means. So again, low probability of it changing anything, but it is our best chance. Next, adoption rates in companies continue to lag behind the technology's capabilities. I would assess this as a medium probability. I think there's a reasonable chance that we overestimate the impact because we overestimate how quickly this is going to get adopted. That goes back to our law of uneven AI distribution that we have talked about before. I had a whole podcast on this. The idea that the value you get from AI and how quickly and consistently that value is realized is directly proportional to your understanding of, access to, and acceptance of the technology. There are going to be plenty of companies, plenty of industries that just do not jump into this. There's going to be some outliers that do it, but generally you may have slow adoption, and that could prevent this disruption. So this to me is the greatest variance, understanding and adoption by industries and professions. But again, it's only going to slow it down. So rather than 1 to 2 years, it may be 2 to 4 years, or whatever that may be. Next is the flaws and limitations of generative AI are greater than are being discussed in the media and will prevent mass disruption in the near term. I think this is a medium probability, but again, it's not evenly distributed across use cases. So like coding is like, it's happening. Like it's going to happen in coding. Is it going to happen in writing as quickly? To be determined. So let me give you an actual example of this one that the flaws and limitations could reduce the curve a little bit. For this preparation for this podcast last night, I went in and gave a prompt to ChatGPT. I did it with the browser version and the GPT-4 version that is not connected to the browser. I don't think I need to read this whole prompt, but just to give you a sense of the prompt. You are an expert market researcher working at a top consulting firm. Your task is to analyze the knowledge worker market in the United States and forecast the impact of AI on knowledge workers in the next 3 to 5 years. Your analysis should include, but not limited to, definition of a worker, how many total employees in the US, have the number of knowledge workers increased or decreased, what is the breakdown of knowledge workers, keeps going down, include an overview of how AI, specifically large language models and generative AI, will impact knowledge workers, and what new knowledge work jobs and careers may be created by large language models and generative AI. Now, telling you that prompt, I will say everything I'm saying to you and everything I said beforehand was not generated by AI. I didn't use any of the stuff they gave me other than to use this as context. So again, I used GPT-4 and I used the browser plugin. So my first takeaway was the GPT-4 output was insanely impressive. Like, if the facts were all true, better than most people I ever hired in my agency that could have written this. And I'm talking about people with 10 years experience. So practical experience, it was really, really well done. Um, the trick was there's a bunch of statistics that I had no idea if they were right or not. So I would still need to go through. So in terms of automating this task, I would still need to go through and verify everything. And at the end of the day, it probably actually wouldn't save me that much time other than the outlining or ideation, as well as improving what I write. When I used the browser plugin, again, it was really impressive, but the sources it cited were terrible. So as a trained journalist, I would never have used the sources that it cited. So I have solved for the fact that there isn't citation by the browser plugin adding citations, and the citations suck. So again, I haven't actually changed this process. So this means that there is a spectrum of use cases with associated benefits and risks that will actually determine the true impact on workers. So I tried to think about this visually, and we'll again, this is like a lot of stream of consciousness thought here. We'll probably play around with this stuff more moving forward, but think about like a XY axis. The Y axis is the ability to automate a task. So think about translation, transcription, drafting, outlining, whatever it is, just stay in the writing, like the generative AI writing example. And the X axis is the risk of errors occurring. So in this example, where I am putting myself out there and saying, I think there's the potential that we are going to lose millions of knowledge work jobs, I cannot rely on a GPT-4 model to output something that has factual errors. Because if I start spitting out a bunch of factual errors and someone goes and fact checks me, then they're going to say, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And now I've ruined my reputation because I relied on this model. So the risk of error is very high. So can I write this analysis with GPT-4? It is very high on the ability to automate. I can definitely do it. But the risk of error is so significant, I would never use it for that use case. Now, if I wanted to think about transcription of this podcast, can definitely do it. Our experience is it's like 90 to 95% accurate with some light editing. And if there's a little bit of error in the transcript, it's not the end of the world. We can go in and fix it. Like it's and we're going to scan it. So that one is much more likely. So if I think about the knowledge workers in my company, and I say, okay, this person does analysis of data. They have to be right all the time. Can I have wrong names, places, dates, statistics, whatever it is? Can't be wrong. That person's not going anywhere. Like they are essential to continue to move forward. And there is no indication that these large language models that are going to be solved for the hallucination or the making stuff up anytime soon. Just Sundar Pichai, we'll talk about in a minute, on 60 Minutes last night, they asked him explicitly, can we solve for hallucination? He said, I think we can make progress. They don't know how to solve this, that it makes stuff up. They gave the example in that one of they asked it, 60 Minutes asked it to write some like economic theory paper or something like that and then cite books, and it made up the 5 books. Like, so we're not solving this. So I think what needs to happen is you need to think about the workers in your organization, what they do and how essential the work is and how critical it is that they do it right every time. So like sending emails, social media shares may not be as high in that risk factor. The other thing, and I'll kind of go into what do we do about it. We created this marketer to machine scale that's in the book, and then we've adapted to like a human to machine scale. And so if you think about task level work, there's a few variables you have to consider: the inputs needed for the AI to do its job, the oversight needed by the human to make sure it does its job correctly, the dependence of the machine on the human to make sure it's accurate and safe and aligned with human values, the improvement rate. So does it get better on its own? And then I would throw in, which was not in the original scale, the risk. What is the risk of it being wrong or performing an unintended or misaligned action? So as you can see, this is a complicated one. So if I go back to, again, this main thought, what could prevent millions of jobs from being lost? I think that the flaws and limitations of generative AI being greater than it appears online, where it's sort of like in the Instagram version of everything. Everything looks amazing. There's all these awesome demos and like it just works. And AutoGP is going to disrupt everything. And Baby AGI is our first. It's bullshit. Like it is not reality. Those 5 use cases you're seeing are not going to be in the world tomorrow. So it is a sign of things to come. but there are flaws and limitations to this technology. Okay, I will wrap here with what do we do about it? Again, we could spend an entire episode just on what do we do about it. Education and training. You have to train individuals in your organization and teams. You have to find people in the industry that you can trust that are talking about these topics. There are a lot of overnight AI experts who are spending their time doing Twitter threads about the 10 things to do with ChatGPT posts. They are a dime a dozen, most likely written by ChatGPT. I am not saying we don't need to find use cases for ChatGPT and generative AI, but if that's all the expert is talking about, they are not an expert in AI. Find voices you trust in this space and trust them to synthesize things that you don't have time for yourself. So that's one. Two, if I was I don't care if you're a small company or a large company, I would create an internal AI council that is charged with developing policies and practices. And I would have them consider the near and long-term impact of AI on the company across all functions. Three, and maybe this could be one because there's already templates to do this, develop responsible AI principles for your organization that guides your use of this technology and your point of view on it and the impact on your team. And I would have generative AI policies that explicitly say how you're using language tools, image generation tools, video generation tools, coding generation. So those are two things I would do right now. I would then conduct an impact or exposure assessment of your teams. So the likelihood of intelligent automation impacting people in your teams at an individual level, at a team level, a function level. I would build an AI roadmap for your company that looks, 1 to 3 years out and says, how are we going to adapt, become AI emergent as an organization? Get someone internally or externally who can lead the charge on that. And then at a high community level, I would engage lawmakers at the city, state, and federal levels. They have to get involved. It is so critical that there is some level of government oversight and regulation. And I just think if that doesn't happen sooner than later, we're going to have much bigger problems a year from now. So thank you for listening. It was a lot, but I'll turn it back over to you, Mike, and take a sip of my coffee.
No, it's a absolutely mission critical topic. So I'm glad we're getting some thinking out there because to your point, I mean, yes, it is daunting. It can be intimidating and scary, but preparation is the only remedy for what could potentially happen, regardless of how scary that might seem.